Buonasera cari massivi e massive, benvenuti per un nuovo streaming speciale di MMO.it. Io sono Plinious e stasera seguiamo e commentiamo insieme la nuova live degli sviluppatori di Blizzard dedicata a Diablo 4, in particolare alla patch 1.1.1.1.1.1.1. Ecco, sto scherzando ovviamente, ma la patch effettivamente è un nome molto lungo perché si chiama 1.1.1, quindi buonasera, benvenuti, come state? Eccoli, Selta in Det, Flaminae, buonasera ragazzi. Allora, che dire, si avvicina il weekend, caldo weekend estivo e quello di stasera lo annuncio qui subito. Quello di stasera probabilmente sarà l'ultimo streaming di Diablo 4. Ebbene sì, ragazzi, questo sarà l'ultimo streaming di Diablo 4 che faremo qui su MMO.it per un po'. Perché? Non perché io abbia smesso di giocarci, abbia disinstallato il gioco, fa schifo, una merda, eccetera. No, ma perché lo sapete cosa esce la prossima settimana? Sì, la prossima settimana è il delirio. E anche se è agosto, la prossima settimana inizia agosto. Solitamente agosto è un mese in cui non esce nulla, un mese molto tranquillo, in cui ci si rilassa. Invece quest'anno il cazzo proprio, nel senso che agosto arriva, ti dà una mazzata sui denti ed è un mese più pieno di quanto non siano solitamente ottobre e novembre, perché quest'anno ad agosto esce il mondo, esce Baldur's Gate 3, c'è la closed beta di Palia, inizia la beta di Palia, c'è la closed beta di Payday 3 e poi stiamo anche aspettando novità su WoW Classic Hardcore, quindi sarà il delirio. E quindi dalla prossima settimana dovremmo, per forza di cose, dovremo mettere in pausa Diablo 4 per un po'. Comunque, permettetemi di dire che in questi quasi 2 mesi dal lancio credo che lo abbiamo già seguito molto, ecco, quindi il suo spazio ce l'ha avuto, adesso è anche ora e tempo di dare spazio ad altri prodotti, ad altri titoli, speriamo altrettanto meritevoli o persino addirittura più meritevoli. Sarà contento BD Silma, chiamate BD Silma, ditegli che questo è l'ultimo streaming di Diablo 4. Sì, ci sta, se attendete, ma fosse per me continuerei anche a giocarci, però... La situazione è quella che conosciamo e che conoscete tutti. Ragazzi, che dire, mancano 3 minuti e inizia la live degli sviluppatori dedicata alla patch 1.1.1. Sapete che adesso non c'è bisogno che ripeto tutta la storia, sapete benissimo che la patch 1.1.0 è stata un disastro, è stata accolta in maniera estremamente negativa dalla community a causa dei tanti nerf, soprattutto shadow nerf, cioè ci sono stati dei nerf nascosti alle statistiche, all'exp, alle resistenze e al danno di molte classi. E gli sviluppatori hanno promesso che con questa nuova patch che uscirà entro la prossima settimana arriveranno diversi buff. Hanno già annunciato in particolare un buff per il barbaro e per la sorceress, l'incantatrice, che sono state le classi più svantaggiate da questo nuovo aggiornamento. No, stasera, sto giro non ridono, sette in detto. Già la scorsa settimana hanno fatto quella live in cui avevano delle facce da funerale, cazzo. Sembrava veramente che gli avessero ammazzato, che gli fosse appena morti i genitori. E quindi no, non ridono più, ragazzi. Sono finiti i tempi, è finito il tempo delle mele e sono finiti i tempi delle grasse risate. Gli sviluppatori facevano la live, ridendosela e scherzandosela di gusto. Adesso qua bisogna vincere e convincere anche perché l'utenza, come ben sapete, è incazzata e sul piede di guerra e quindi niente ragazzi, non so come mai ho la visuale così in alto, però, però dicevo, Blizzard deve davvero convincere. Aspettate giusto un attimo che aumento un po' lo zoom, dopodiché, ecco... Dopodiché, ragazzi, allora manca un minuto, siamo pronti, la diretta inizierà tra pochissimo. Quindi, prima di iniziare, io vi ricordo di iscrivervi al canale se ancora non l'avete fatto, di followarci qua su Twitch e soprattutto di abbonarvi per supportare il nostro lavoro, per sostenere il progetto editoriale indipendente di MMO.it e per tornare a 200 massivi postumani, anche d'estate, perché vi stiamo portando tantissimi contenuti. Ieri ha streamato Ray, l'altro ieri ha streamato il buon Askezor, no, cioè in realtà ieri ho streamato io, stasera streamo io, l'altro ieri Ray, martedì il buon Asked, tantissimi contenuti e non parliamo la prossima settimana perché sarà un macello tra Paglia, Baldur's Gate, Payday 3, eccetera, eccetera. Quindi, grandissimo Galatimus che è arrivato e si è abbonato per 14 mesi, vero massivo postumano. Grazie mille di cuore, Galatimus. Top, top. E quindi ragazzi, sono le 8 in punto, sta per iniziare la live, quindi direi bando alle ciance, partiamo subito e passiamo alla schermata vera e propria. Dai, Allora, anzitutto io vi ricordo ovviamente che abbiamo pubblicato diverse news con tutti i dettagli su MMO.it, in particolare questa appunto riguardo la patch 1.1.1 di cui parleremo stasera, ve la linko in chat e per adesso ci siamo ragazzi, segui la chiacchierata intorno al fuoco della patch 1.1.1, si può seguire o su Twitch o su YouTube, io direi che la possiamo tranquillamente seguire su YouTube se mi tiene, se carica. E... Pronto? Facciamo un aggiornamento. Ecco, sta iniziando. Allora ragazzi, adesso io alzo l'audio. Ovviamente sappiate che dovrete vi chiederò di darmi un feedback audio. Fatemi sapere se il volume è troppo alto, è troppo basso, se mi sentite, eccetera, eccetera. Grande Galatimus è sempre attivo. Allora, questa è la season 1, la stagione degli abietti, iniziata il 20 luglio. Eccoci qua.
Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to another Diablo 4 campfire chat.
Sono in
My name is
quattro
Adam Fletcher.
stasera.
I am the
Allora, lui
associate
ormai lo
editor for
conosciamo,
the
lui è
Guild of
Adam
Diablo.
Fletcher,
Joined
il
here
community
by Joe Shelley,
manager.
game director for
Abbiamo
Diablo
Joe
4,
Shelley, il game
and Studio
director.
54, which you guys know
Joe Piora è
Andrew as well, I guess.
l'associate game director. E lui
Familiar
invece il
faces,
secondo è è una
associate
faccia
director
nuova,
for
Adam Jackson, lead class
Diablo 4, and
designer.
of course Adam Jackson. Brand new
Interessante
face
prima
here.
volta che lo vedo.
He is our lead class designer for
Allora,
Diablo 4.
pronto,
We have a lot
pronto,
to talk
faccio un
about
po' di
today.
prove
In fact,
audio.
just know there's two Adams, two Joes, so this is going to get really confusing here.
Buonasera
And
Rami,
we were
buonasera a
thinking about
tutti.
maybe
Esatto, ci
like
sono due Adam, due Joe, è un
changing it
casino.
to,
Sarà molto
determine who
confusa
talks
questa
next
live.
or whatever. But I will say we actually do have a lot to talk about. In fact, I
Hanno un
would
sacco
almost
di
say
cose di
this
cui
is like
parlare.
dev update stream worthy as
At least
opposed to
Campfire Plus.
Campfire Plus, yeah.
Easily.
Plus plus. It was like New Game Plus Plus or whatever. But we do have a
Hanno
lot to
delle
talk
facce
about.
un po' meno da funerale
Specifically
rispetto
around
alla
patch
scorsa settimana, dai.
1.1.1. Did I say
Ecco,
enough
parleranno
ones?
della patch
1.1.
1.1.1.
1.1.1, patch 1.1.1.
We did.
We are going to talk about some balance changes that are going to be coming.
Modifiche al
to that
bilanciamento.
patch. And of course, we're also going to be talking about the dates of when that patch is actually going to be hitting, along with when players will be seeing the patch notes, which will be
Annunceranno la data, sia la data dell'uscita della patch, sia la data in cui usciranno le patch notes.
We do want to jump right into it because we do have a ton to talk about. I will actually throw it over here.
Sono bassi? Adesso lo alzo.
He wants to talk a little bit about
Aspetta, Silma, ho annunciato stasera ultimo streaming di Diablo 4. Sei contento? Ultimo streaming di Diablo 4 su MMO.it.
Our goals and what we're going to be doing in this patch in the immediate future, and then talking a little bit about kind of how the class team feels about classes and kind of what we're thinking in a more mid to long term space. So for this patch, we've got a lot going on.
Ok, lui parla del bilanciamento
One of
delle
our goals
classi.
is kind of, I think, obvious to the community. We want to kind of improve the effectiveness and the fun of the sorcerer and the barbarian. So we've got a lot of changes coming in there, and I think I want to frame this in two ways of kind of what we're thinking about the sorcerer and then what we're thinking about with the barbarian. Because they both have,
Prima
kind of
parlano
different things going on.
dell'incantatrice e
For
poi
the
del
sorcerer in
barbaro.
this patch, we're focusing on reducing something that we call kiss curse mechanics, which is kind of, I know, a very designery term, but it's this idea that we give you a really cool power effect, and then we kind of take something away or make it nerfed or nerf some other part of you in some way. Usually for balance reasons.
L'ho spiegato
To make
prima
sure that
perché è
it's not just
l'ultimo,
not
Danico, perché la prossima
Yeah,
settimana
just to
sarà un
exactly there,
delirio.
it's like, to your point, it's
Prossima
like, so
settimana
we
esce
can-
Baldur's
what do
Gate
we have,
3,
20%
Palia e la
before
beta
the
di
game,
Payday
we can take
3.
10% of something else
Quindi
away, we
no.
can do 30% or
Yeah.
45%.
Diablo 4 dovremmo per forza di
Exactly.
cose
Usually it's
metterlo
solid
in
fantasy in
pausa.
a really strong
Però
way, but
direi
we
che
just
l'abbiamo
can't, like,
portato
do
già
that
fin
justifiably
troppo,
without
ecco.
just breaking the mechanic. But we found out in a lot of ways we've been a little too harsh with that, and so we're going to try and reduce or
Sono
remove
stati
that
troppo
space.
duri, sono stati
And the other
troppo
one is, like,
severi
this
con
ability,
l'incantatrice,
like,
quindi la
notice we
bufferanno.
have a tough time, you know, when they start getting pushing those later.
Potevate
later
accorgervene
effective
prima,
executions.
ragazzi
And
miei.
so we're going to be looking at ways to increase that specifically. And an example of that curse mechanic is the serpentine aspect. If you know that one, it's the one where you can spawn an additional hydra.
L'aspetto del serpente che permette di spawnare un'idra
un'idra
aggiuntiva.
For the barbarian, we're
Barbaro.
focusing on improving the early game and making it feel better.
Miglioreranno gli early game per renderlo più efficace negli early game.
From your basic skills. And then we're also looking at the late game for the barbarian by
E
making
anche
a lot of
all'end
their
game.
uniques more attractive and effective. So you're going to see later when we go through the notes that you know, we're going to be changing around usually about one affix per unique from something that really isn't that attractive for players to something that they really, really want, which we think will help make those items really exciting.
Now, when we make changes to items, specifically items like uniques, many of these changes only take effect on new items, right? Like I think we have an example of the Hellhammer here.
Vediamo,
Yeah,
Hellam,
kind
questo è
of.
un
It's a
ancestrale
little more
unico.
complex than that.
Un
So
unico
we're gonna go into one
ancestrale.
of our examples of what we're updating here.
Change damage to
But when
crowd
we
control
update the
enemies to
item,
critical strike
we actually
damage.
update Hellhammer
Ok.
in two different ways.
Hanno cambiato il tipo
So
di danno
we're
dal
increasing
crowd
the
control
duration that the ground is gonna be
al
immune to burning,
critical,
and also
al danno
increasing
critico
damage, and
sui
that's the
nemici.
actual unique effect power, you know, the exciting thing that the item does. But you can see here on Hellhammer, we're also doing another change where we're actually granting you bonus critical strike damage and removing the bonus damage to crowd control enemies, right? So on the left, what you see here, when you
Questa è
log
l'arma
into
del
the game,
barbaro.
you know, after this patch, the left version is what you're going to get. So you're not going to get the critical strike damage change with the actual item affix there, the rule changed, but you are going to get the updates to the upheaval, blasting longer, and doing more damage. On the right, when you find your new items after the patch, you're going to get the new
Ok,
affixes.
ovviamente l'oggetto di sinistra è quello che c'era prima, l'oggetto di destra è quello nuovo che metteranno, che ci sarà con la patch.
New versions will have everything new, and the old versions will get the new stuff on the actual legendary effects, but then you won't have the new item stats on it.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, so
Mica
going back
male
to the kind of
quest'arma,
other things that we're looking at. So that's the sorcerer and
Mica male.
barbarian what we're focusing on. Then generally across all classes, we're doing a few other things as well. We're looking at builds that aren't really hitting a high enough power level, and we're going to be just buffing them and increasing the power of them, so they should feel better and be more competitive. We're also going to be looking at increasing the attractiveness of kind of uniques across the board. We're focusing on sorcerer and barbarian for this patch, but we actually believe that we can do this kind of thing across the board. There's a lot of uniques that we think aren't really hitting the mark. It's something that's kind of a tough thing that we talk about a lot on the team, because you know the roles and the things that the uniques have as far as their item power are all fixed, right? They can't re-roll different stats all over the place. So we could very easily just make, you know, all uniques really good by putting all the best stats on the items, right? That's an easy thing to do for us. But we kind of have a push and pull there where we don't want to just make all of them clearly the best items in the game because they have all the best stats and they have really good power.
Bisogna provare con mano, ragazzi, come al solito, il bilanciamento di questi nuovi oggetti.
But we think that we are just not hitting the mark on a lot of them, so we're boosting them a little bit and then just kind of
Vabbè, insomma, boostano Barbaro e
Then
Incantatrice.
we're going to be looking at opening up build-specific designs to be more widely useful. So there's a lot of effects on legendary powers and other.
Ok, vogliono rendere più build maggiormente usabili.
Narrow use case, like only on a single skill or a single group of skills or using a
Vogliono rendere le build più varie,
And
diciamo.
in many cases, we're just going to open that up to be more widely usable, so that players can actually, you know, use them in more different builds or different ways. One example of this that we'll go over later is Chain Lightning's upgrade, Greater Chain Lightning.
Ad esempio Chain Lightning, che se non sbaglio è un'abilità dell'Incantatrice.
Bonus damage when it bounces off of you, and we're going to change that so that it just does bonus damage when it bounces off of anything. So instead of being kind of a narrow use case where you're only using it like on a boss or a single target enemy and getting
Ok,
value,
verrà
you'll just
modificata.
get it a lot more often now.
Yeah, it feels like a much better like lightning range skill now in that way. I can
In modo da
definitely see
renderla
it.
un'abilità a distanza
Let's get on
più potente e più
Totally.
efficace.
So that's kind of what we're looking at for this patch.
Okay, so we
Ok, questo è il grosso della patch.
about sort of our things that we want to do, like going forward in the game, other things we want to do. Not all of that stuff is in this patch.
Yeah, no, we have a lot of talks
Ok,
on our team. We have
non
a lot
tutto
of
ciò che
things we
vogliamo
need to
fare in
talk
questa
around.
patch,
I thought it'd be really good
ovviamente.
also to kind of talk a little bit about how we feel
Lo
about more
sapevamo già.
longer term goals and things about the game. So these aren't coming in this patch, but things that we're thinking about that'll come in the future that the team's kind of focus on. The first one is kind of finding ways to bring
Ovviamente
different types of
ci sono
damage
molte
closer
altre cose
together.
su cui stanno
As I'm
lavorando
sure
per
many
il
of you in the
futuro.
community know, vulnerable and crit are really, really strong right now. Kind of a lot of the meta is about you make an enemy vulnerable and then you do bonus damage to them and then you stack as much crit strike chance and crit damage as you can and then you blow them up, right? Our game actually was foundationally made with other types of builds that aren't only those in mind, right? We have like damage over time or dot damage, things like Firewall or Shadow Necro does a lot of this. We also have Overpower as a mechanic in our game, and these other different ways to build your character, we want them to have parity with, vulnerable and crit damage. So we're going to be trying to find, our goal is to find a way, and we're working on it right now, that all those different ways of dealing damage have a lot of parity. So no matter if you're an Overpower build or a crit build or
Vogliamo aumentare la varietà delle classi, questo lo sapevamo già.
Power to all the other different types of ways to play. So another one that we're looking at is adding scaling to builds and effects that don't really scale very well in the game. This is something that I think is a big opportunity for
Ok,
us.
vogliamo migliorare lo scaling dei danni. Sapete che Diablo 4 usa un sistema di scaling dei livelli, no?
Legendary powers and effects that like spawn a new thing. An example of this is like on the Barbarian, there's some legendary powers that spawn earthquakes or dust devils. Another one is the Necromancer has like things that leave shadow trails on the ground that deal damage. And these things, they deal what we call flat damage, which is like we give it a damage number, and then that's how much it does, and then that damage number kind of scales with player level. But what we find is that a lot of these things are really good in the early and mid game when they drop, but then when you get to the really late game, they kind of fall off really hard. And what we want to do is find ways to add scaling so that the player can opt into like making a build out of these things. So if I want to be an Earthquake Barbarian or a Dust Devil Barbarian, I can actually do that, and it's supported by the game. So that's something that we're really excited about because we think that'll open up a lot more build possibilities. Ultimates are kind of in this range as well. It's a more long-term goal.
Mi piacerebbe che parlassero dei miglioramenti alla quality of life. Ragazzi, parlate un po' di miglioramenti alla quality of life. Questa famosa stash aggiuntiva. Ce la date o non ce la date?
Because Bone Storm is awesome, not because it gives you a buff, right? Or Grizzly Rage or other ones, right? So that's kind of something that we're thinking about in the mid to long term to make the game kind of open up and have more builds available.
So we've been talking here a little bit about sort of our philosophy here. We're about to get into patch notes. We're about to talk about Sorcerer. But we thought that it was important to talk a little bit about this philosophy, both because we want to be very transparent in terms of like how we're thinking about the game and what kinds of
Promettono che vogliono essere molto trasparenti con la community. Speriamo che sia vero.
And also so that we can incorporate feedback from the community, feedback from you into these kinds of changes.
Yeah, and that goes down even to the format for this particular live stream, right? So like we're gonna go through a lot of details really, really soon, which I think people are really excited about. I hope people are really excited about, because we're gonna have a lot of those. And then afterwards, we want to hear back from the community about like how this worked. Like, was this the best way to get this information? Did you get a lot of good data from us, and do you understand why we're doing making the changes that we are? Right, and to Joe's point, again, it's really useful for you to understand these things. It's going to help with the feedback that you give us back. Whether we're hitting it or not.
Yeah, and this is like a multi-stage type of thing. So we're actually gonna. You guys are about to see a ton of slides here in a second, going through pretty much all the different detailed balance changes that are coming across the classes. But then, like we said, like we do plan on releasing patch notes so that you guys can actually read them in more detail, and in those patch notes will be additional information such as like all the bug fixes and so forth that will be coming.
No, ma infatti loro non dicono di voler seguire la community in tutto e per tutto, se tendete, dicono di voler essere trasparenti con la community, che è un'altra cosa.
Now you're just gonna spoil it. We're actually gonna release patch notes.
Ma adesso iniziano a ridere,
You guys will see these patch notes.
Per favore, manteniamo un po' di serietà.
We will release patch notes next Wednesday.
Prossimo mercoledì. Mamma mia, ce le fanno sudare ste patch notes. Comunque, prossimo mercoledì. Ecco, comincia a ridere.
What we do want to do is we do want to jump straight into the balance changes and so forth.
Yeah.
And we do want to start off with the sorcerer.
Ok, vediamo un
we have a
po'.
lot of different slides and
Ok,
changes here
modifiche,
that we do
ecco le
want to
modifiche
discuss,
al bilanciamento
Adam, I
della
want to go through them.
sorceress,
Yeah, totally. So I think what I'll do is just
dell'incantatrice.
give you a few moments to look at the screen and kind of see what we're doing and then talk high level about some of the bigger changes here. So flickering firebolt is one we're changing firebolt to basically just generate mana when you hit an enemy. Before
Facciamo
it was
screenshot.
generate when you hit a burning enemy. So when you would just try and cast firebolt, without doing anything else, you would just always miss the first hit of getting the mana, which felt bad a lot.
Ok, quindi
Yeah.
cambiamenti a flick e in firebolt.
Make it, feel nicer. You still feel nice about burning things and piercing, but you just get it more often. Probably another big one here is the greater chain lightning change I talked about, where every time that it bounces, the next hit would deal damage rather than only bouncing off of you. And then we're also buffing the other choice for destructive chain lightning, so you get more crackling energies. Next one, let's go to the passives. These are
Anche
all
le
the
passive.
passives
Vies
on
Mastery,
skill
Esus
tree.
Ferocity e
Esus
Combustion.
Ferocity is a big one. You can see a lot of these kinds of changes where
Io non devo dire, non la
it's kind of
conosco
an
molto
ordinary
come che è la
space
classe, è una delle
balance.
classi che conosco
Basically,
meno,
it's
l'incantatrice.
good.
Però
This one, it used to not really
sicuramente
work on
positivo che la
boss very
boostino
well.
perché l'avevano nerfata troppo.
Enemies by critting them to get the bonus, and now you can also get it during boss fights by just hitting the boss and critting them. So you'll just have uptime and
Sì, l'hanno boostato un sacco. Il radius aumentato del 50% a Fireball.
Next, for Paragon, we're gonna talk.
Ok, questo per quanto riguarda i punti
These are a lot
Paragon.
of the defensive changes that we talked
Quindi
about.
potenziano
So you've
anche i
got some
punti
damage
Paragon.
reduction, increases
Interessante.
to a lot of the glyphs and nodes across the board. Again, we're targeting that late game survivability for the sorcerer. Another one that kind of opens up more ways to play and just makes it more usable is the Searing Heat Legendary node. This one is when you cast Fireball or Meteor, now it just increases your crit strike chance across the board for 5 seconds, so you can get that crit strike and use it on any of your skills rather than only on them.
Yeah, damage reduction is actually like extremely strong in
Yes.
Diablo 4.
It's really, really good.
Yeah.
So these things should be pretty impactful.
Yeah.
Next one.
Altre modifiche ai Paragon Point. Qui
Qui
non c'è molto da dire, ragazzi. Se la cosa vi interessa, fatevi lo screenshot della sorcerer. È inutile che legga tutto, lo vedete. Sì, certo, sono piccoli potenziamenti dal 4% al 5%, però modifiche anche agli aspetti leggendari. Quindi questo ad esempio è quello di cui parlavano prima, Serpentine Aspect. Adesso puoi avere un Hydra in più attivo e la durata dell'Hydra è aumentato dal 14 al 24%.
Before this one used to be that it only increased your crit damage of meteor only and only against healthy enemies. So it was one skill and only healthy enemies.
Sono curioso invece di vedere le modifiche al Barbaro, perché il Barbaro è una classe che conosco meglio.
Extra bonus against healthy enemies. So now you can use this in builds that you weren't able to at all before. The next one is pretty good, is gravitational aspects. This one was it used to reduce your damage in exchange for the lightnings orbiting around you. Now we're going to increase it. So again, that's a pretty big swing in power.
Poi altre leggendarie. Certo, sono un bel po' le modifiche. L'hanno completamente rivista sta classe.
Chain lightning to that bonus baseline. It used to only give you mana when it bounced off of you. Now it's going to give you mana when it bounces off of everything. So again, a lot more usable. And in combination with that Unbroken Tether, I think Chain Lightning players are going to be eating pretty this patch. We're also increasing the bonuses of Chain Lightning that you get when that proc happens. So lots of Chain Lightning.
Se vedete che la schermata si blocca è perché sono io che sto
We're
screenshottando.
also putting a new legendary into the game. This is the Mage Lord's aspect. This one makes your Veer's Mastery.
Ok, nuovi aspetti leggendari. Mage Lord's Aspect. Key Passive Damage Reduction è aumentato dal 20 al 30% per ogni nemico vicino fino a un massimo tra il 60 e il 90%.
Snow Veiled aspect is getting a pretty big generic buff, where before it just gave you unstoppable when you
Vabbè, mo non posso screenshottare tutto, comunque.
It's kind of frost armor. But now it also gives you bonus armor when you use it as well, just generally more useful. Incendiary aspect terrifies me, but we're doing it. This one used to be that it procced off of all of your burning damage. So your burning damage could give you mana, and now it's going to just do it off of your pyromancy skills damage. So this opens up meteor, fireball, all of those other skills that aren't really firewall. I think that's good for that one. And then for uniques, we've got the gloves of the Illuminator.
Ok, questo per quanto riguarda gli unici, i guanti dell'illuminato.
Before, when you got this,
Non conosco,
it was
devo
kind of in a
dire.
very weird place where the bounces could do it pretty often in such a way where you'd only hit an enemy once with a bounce, And we have to put this damage penalty on it because, you know, you can hit enemies multiple times with it, and it's AoE, and gives you a bunch of procs of all of your stuff, so it's really, really strong. But because you could only hit an enemy once, a lot of times this was just a damage nerf for your character.
Yeah, you bounce it one time on the monster, and
Yep,
that.
and now you got nerfed for getting unique, right?
That's
That never feels good. So we reduced the distance that it bounces a little bit, so it should be more easier to consistently hit an enemy twice. And then we also reduced that damage penalty, so now no matter what, if you hit an enemy twice, it's a damage bonus. And then we also replaced one of its affixes from damage to stunned to lucky hit to restore resource.
Va bene, dai.
Since this, you know,
Andiamo avanti,
since enemies a lot of time, the lucky hit procs are very powerful with this, so we think this will be a lot more attractive for players. Alright, moving on to the barbarian. So, like I said before,
il
we're
barbaro.
increasing the fury generation of all of those basic
Allora,
skills.
questo è lo
So you're
screenshot.
just gonna get more fury in the early
Aumentano la
games.
generazione
You're
della
gonna do that
furia.
basic core skill loop a little more often, so it should be more fun. Double
Meno
swings
male.
gain a damage buff, ruptures gain a damage buff, charges gain a damage buff, and one of the enhancements is increasing that vulnerable duration, so it should hopefully be more attractive.
One thing I do want to note is like even on the if we go back to the other slide, like
Hanno
a lot of people are
potenziato
going,
anche
like,
Upheaval,
Fury gain 11
Bash.
to 13 and like 10 to 13, and they're always like noting like, well, that doesn't feel like a big number and so forth, but I think
By
players.
percentage, it's really big.
Yeah, by
It
percentage,
also
it's actually
scales.
really big.
with a
Bash,
lot of other
Flay,
stuff.
Frenzy,
It
Lunging
gets
Strike, Double
spooky
Swing,
when we do too much
Raptor,
percent-wise.
Charge
Exactly.
e Mighty
So I think
Charge.
that however-
Ragazzi,
I
potrebbe
think
essere un
people
ottimo momento per farsi un barbaro dopo questo boost.
Not realizing that, you know, other things obviously it scales with other
Minchia,
things.
lui l'hanno boostato un sacco.
And
Il danno della
mixes in
carica è
with
raddoppiato
other gear
dal
that you
30 al
have and so forth.
60%.
So this is just the baseline number. And you have
Anche
to
Mighty
remember
Charge hanno
that
raddoppiato la
obviously
durata
that
del
number gets
vulnerable.
tweaked, everything else gets tweaked, that gets
Hanno
One point that I
boostato
would do when we do like damage increases,
a
where it
bestia.
might seem small because it's increasing the base that everything else multiplies and scales on. It can be a bit. I mean, sometimes it's not as much. We can go and do it again, right? But it's scary and
Yeah.
risky. So we have to think about that because it's very easy to be like, oh, just make it 20, and now late game you're just like bashing once and then getting all your fury back or something, right?
Right.
So,
Bene.
all right, so violent upheaval. This one gives you berserking, and it used to be that you had to damage 2 or more enemies or 3 or more enemies to get a better buff, and now we're adding bosses to that.
Violent
So when you're in a
upheaval.
boss fight, you're just
Non so come sia in
getting
italiano. Il
damage.
problema è che siamo abituati
And
ad utilizzare le
maybe
abilità in
score card
italiano,
would be more
ovviamente.
useful.
A parte
We've
Askez,
also
che lo
got
gioca in
Gushing
inglese.
Wounds is one I think worth calling out. This is the key passive. We're increasing the scaling of your bleed.
Sì, il barbaro al momento era inutile. L'hanno potenziato
Yeah, that's huge.
un bel po', dai. Uè, buonasera Joydrax, non si sa ancora quando uscirà la patch, ma dovrebbero annunciarlo alla fine di questa live, comunque prossima settimana. Io dico venerdì prossimo. Sono abbastanza convinto che sia venerdì prossimo, cioè 4 agosto. Turbine dovrebbero velocizzarlo, sembra un uomo viola. No, buffano in particolare Barbaro e Incantatrice, che sono le due classi che hanno state più nerfate dopo la patch 1.1.0.
Only running like one death blow charge, and like that build just didn't
Yeah,
come
Death was
online.
probably one of the easier ones to get, and even then it can be a little hard, right?
Yeah, for sure. This is great. It opens up a lot.
Yeah. So next,
Poi, leggendari, abbiamo gli aspetti leggendari, anche questi
one
belli.
Of the aspect of Unrelenting Fury here is one worth calling out, where again you're going to get a benefit when hitting bosses.
Non ne hanno parlato delle altre classi, ma le altre classi sono già, da quanto risulta, sono già efficaci le altre classi.
We're increasing the amount of damage reduction and damage bonus. So if you want to do that earthquake build, like I said before, we want those earthquakes to do damage and be meaningful.
Non hanno detto
in the
niente sul
meantime,
necro.
While you're standing in them, those buffs on you are going to be a little bit more powerful.
Finora non hanno detto niente, però considerate che è iniziata da 20 minuti questa live.
Alright, next, so uniques, we've got
Poi,
a lot
gli
of stuff
unici.
here with barbarian uniques.
Fields
Again,
of
kind of a
Crimson.
high-level goal here is we're generally improving just the base thing the unique does, and then also trying to replace an item stat that wasn't very attractive or not as attractive with one that we know players really, really like to make these meaningful for them. So Fields of Crimson, this is the one where you do blood pools when you rupture
Quindi
enemies.
Fields of Crimson, Hellhammer, Ramaladnis Magnum Ops, 100.000 steps e Battle
And then we're also
Trance.
changing the rupture cooldown reduction with bonus crit strike damage. And
Non li
again,
conosco.
combine that
In
with
inglese
bonus
non
is
sono abituato a...
bleed
From 11 to
damage,
70,
yeah,
right?
where that
Sono
scales
abituato a
better.
giocare in italiano,
That'll
quindi...
just be quite a bit more damage across
That's awesome.
the board. Hellhammer we talked about. From a lot of these magnum opus, we're replacing the physical damage affix with vulnerable damage. 100,000 steps. The base affix of the boots, we're replacing the evade cooldown affix with just more evade charges. And then we're also replacing
Ok, ad esempio hanno sostituito il danno contro i nemici stunnati da un bonus alla velocità di movimento. Ah, c'è anche... Ah, ok, quindi ci sono anche altre classi. Come non detto, ragazzi, ci sono anche altre classi che vengono buffate. Avete visto? C'è il Rogue.
Adam, you've been working on. We don't want to leave the other three
Il
classes
Rogue è
out, right?
rottissimo.
Totally.
Most of these changes are.
Ok, Joydrax, anche ci sono miglioramenti anche alle altre tre
We had some
classi.
time to make some changes to the other classes.
We
too.
totally did, so we can go on here. One thing I do want to
Ecco
call out,
qua.
though, the focus of the patch is the sorcerer or the barbarian, so you're going to see a lot more for them, but we want to give the other classes something exciting as well. Rogues are actually, I think, eating pretty well right now, so they're pretty good, but we still found some things of underused things to buff. Probably one of the more big ones
Sì,
here
che il
is
Rogue tra l'altro è già
Solero,
fortissimo, è
we're
forse la
changing
classe
the
più rotta del
head,
gioco e lo
the cast
potenziano
third
ancora.
cast of the arrow, just pierces
Ok.
all enemies, which is a pretty big just generic bonus. We got some feedback on Rain of Arrows that it was kind of weird that the second wave was the one that knocked all the enemies down, because a lot of times, you know, you cast a skill and the combat is in a certain state where the enemies are where you want to hit them and probably where you want to CC them, because you usually want to group stuff up to CC them. But because it happens on the second wave, you know, the first wave comes, does a little damage to everything,
They all move.
and then they all move, and then everything goes and falls apart, right?
Qui
So
c'è
this
poco da
makes it
dire,
a little
ragazzi, io
harder.
lascio parlare gli sviluppatori perché le modifiche le vedete a
Sets
schermo.
itself up, yeah, exactly. Here, let me look if there's anything noteworthy. There's some buffs to things that are underused. So the aspect of elusive menace no longer requires hits to be from close enemies. So again, we're just making things more generically usable. And then for uniques, kind of similar to Barbarian, we found some room here to make a couple stats replaced with things that we know are really, really attractive. So in Windforce, we replaced the all stats affix with bonus vulnerable damage. And then the Word of Hakan, we replace ultimate damage with cooldown reduction.
Time is money, friend.
So Druid, kind of similar to what I said about the Barbarian, about that early game kind of feeling a little bit slow. We're also improving all of the spirit generation of the Druid's basic skills. So across the board, you're just gonna be able to
Eccolo,
get
boostano il
those
druido, questo mi
easier.
interessa,
We're
aumentano
also
la generazione di
improving the
spirito.
passive damage generally of a lot of their companion skills.
Grazie mille Godina, è vero massivo postumano, grazie di cuore. Abbonato per 13 mesi. Top. Questo mi interessa, ragazzi, il druido. Ecco, rip. Oh, incredibile, aumentano i corvi. L'hanno capito che sono inutili al momento.
And then we're also looking at rabies. We know that poison druid, like just if I want to do pure poison druid, is a little bit behind, so we're really targeting rabies as a pretty meaty upgrade.
Ah, rabies sarebbe rabbia. Sì, è quella del veleno. Molto bene. Notate il typo in legendaris, invece il leggendaris legendaris. Vabbè, comunque. Migliorano l'aspetto Metamorphic Stone, Aspect of the Alpha, vaffanculo, fermi tutti, non ho fatto in tempo a leggere, mango l'aspect, ok. Ok, poi Necromante, Joydrax, ci sei ancora? Sei connesso? Bel potenziamento anche per il Necro.
The Wither legendary upgrade here, this is the one where your shadow dot damage is going up, and we added a new way to scale that damage in the legendary space. We got feedback that this really just wasn't scaling enough to be meaningful, even when you invested a lot into willpower. So now you're just going to get a lot more bang for your buck. You're going to do, the requirement is less, so you're going to get more procs of the increase to your damage and chance to proc that damage, and then also just your bonus damage straight up is going to be better. So the shadow builds should be a lot better. Empowering Reaper, we got some feedback that totally makes sense.
Niente legato a lanciadossa però, Niente legato a lanciadossa.
Sever would spawn a pool of blight under enemies, and the chance was based on you critting them. So the idea was you would create a crit build, and then you turn your crit into these pools of damage, right? That sounds kind of cool. But it turns out, you know, crit doesn't work with dots at all. So that pool doesn't get scaled with the way that you make the pool. So it just doesn't work design-wise. I take the blame for that. But now we're changing it so you just have to damage enemies to spawn those pools of blight. So now this can actually be more friendly to dot builds. And then aspect of exposed flesh. This one used to have the same effect, but only when hitting vulnerable enemies with bone skills. So now you can just get
Oh, molto bene Set and Death. La Juventus è esclusa dalla Conference League e dovrà pagare una multa di 20 milioni di euro. Allora, sono molto contento che sia esclusa dalla Conference League. Una coppetta assolutamente inutile a cui non abbiamo interesse a partecipare. Certo, multa di 20 milioni di euro, quella è una bella stangata. Quella è una bella stangata.
So we're going to move that to a utilities. Now you can put this like on your boots and other places that you
Sulla Conference League sti cazzi.
take that prime ring slot to use this legendary. And then we're also updating the effect a little bit to be stronger. And then for uniques, kind of similar to what I said before, the Greaves of the Empty Tomb, we're changing the bonus intelligence affix to be replaced with bonus move speed, which I know is particularly attractive for necromancer players.
Yeah, mobility for
Oh,
necromancy.
yeah, well, necromancers have mobility a little
Non
bit.
urlate, non urlate.
Slower, the
Allora,
slow,
ci sono modifiche anche ai mostri, ai minion, in particolare a Balrog e gli Elite. Ah, adesso fanno meno danno ai companion del druido e negromante. Quindi hanno potenziato di fatto i companion, o comunque hanno fatto in modo che ricevano meno danno.
And then now we got some of our generic updates. We only have a couple of them. The first one is to a
Cage Dart of Spell Breaking.
And this one used to say that when you took elemental damage, you gained damage resistance to that element, right? It was thematic to reducing.
Sì, l'hanno potenziato Joydrax, ma sei un po' in ritardo, scusami. È stata tipo 10 minuti fa la parte dedicata al necro. Mi è andato AFK, mi sa, perché ti avevo chiamato prima per dirti che l'hanno buffato anche il necro. Ah, ti sei allontanato? Mi spiace, però hanno buffato anche il necro. Alla peggio dopo riguardiamo la live. Allora, all stats are fixed replaced with max life. La barriera adesso è basata sulla vita massima. Quindi quegli affissi che avevano tutte le stat aumentate adesso danno più vita e non più stat. Sì, non ti aspettavi una roba clamorosa, però l'hanno leggermente buffato. Hanno buffato tutte e 5 le classi, ragazzi, alla fine.
A ton of updates coming to the classes.
Yeah, a lot of
So
stuff.
we literally
A lot of
just went
stuff.
through it's quite almost like an encyclopedia of stuff.
Allora, adesso manca soltanto la data. La data della patch e i quality of life, quindi la stessa
We
aggiuntiva.
got some stuff in for the rogue, necromancer, and druid players as well. Making sure that we kind of like buffed up some of the more undertuned stuff that we had
Actually, one more caveat to all of that. I should have said this at the beginning. It's not final yet.
seen. Not final
This
yet.
is
That's why
planned.
you probably saw the
The
little one.
odds are very high we do 90% of it or most of it, maybe even all. But as we get into the weeds of things and we're updating things, some things may change. So this is our plan. It's very likely it'll be at least most of it, if not all of it. But it's not completely in the game yet, so.
There might be some number tweaks, basically.
Yeah, we always add a small caveat just because things are still going through testing right now on our side.
Correct.
Va bene, non è. Ovviamente queste patch notes non sono definitive.
Very careful, always caveat. Not final until you see it in the game.
Adam's being very
Finché la patch non esce
It's not
potrebbero.
going to be- You're not going to experience something that's totally different from what you
Finché la patch non esce potrebbero
We're
cambiare.
actually discuss when patch notes be released
We will.
later on in
Yeah.
the stream. So
Yes.
we'll reveal that.
Okay.
And one thing I do want to note is like there because I'm seeing this like a little bit in chat and people are
Yeah.
going like, hey, you guys are adjusting.
Sì, dai, Kill. Stanno correggendo il tiro per quella maledetta patch 1.1.0.
Like, there's a lot of questions about like, hey, what's the overall plan?
È andata così, purtroppo.
Builds and so forth in the
Blizzard,
future.
I have no idea what I'm doing.
Work on, look at in the future.
I
This
can
is
talk
not
about
just
this
a-
for a very long time. Yes, Druid and Necromancer are a little bit different, so I guess I'll talk Necromancer first. So Necromancer Minions is absolutely a core fantasy of Necromancer players. That
Attenzione, vogliamo parlano dei minion del negromante, vogliamo buffarli.
Minions, it turns out, in all games, not just ours, or summons, or all that, are very complicated and hard to make work. They have a lot of moving parts that are different than every other class and build archetype in many games. They have AI, they have a passive and active component to them typically. There's a lot going on. So in this patch, we're not touching the Necromancer stuff a lot. It is on the team's radar of looking at
Ci
the ways
stanno
that we scale,
lavorando.
the ways that things prop with them, looking at just the combination of passive versus active activity that we want.
Buonasera intanto, vedo che stanno iniziando a connettervi. Buonasera ragazzi, benvenuti. Allora, nessuna promessa su quando succederà, ma stanno lavorando per buffare il necro, la build Minion Master, il necro summon, insomma.
One of the things that we were concerned about when launching the game is we didn't want the druid to like have just as many or more companions than the necromancer, and they're stronger. It's like, where's the fantasy of the necromancer if the druid does it better, right? So that was something that we contended with a lot.
Anche il druido.
We're gonna flex on that over time. We did add support. We still love companions on druid, and we will absolutely be making it more of a thing. Hence why we're buffing them a lot in this patch.
Ok, potenziando anche
the design space and the
i
fantasy
pet
different classes.
del
We don't
druido.
want all the classes to be exactly the same because then you don't feel different when you're playing. You don't have new interesting mechanics that are between them. We talk about that a lot on the team. It's very easy to be like, hey, just this class doesn't have this and it's fun, give it to all the others, right? I think Necromancer and move speed is part of that where we overcorrected a little bit, where like we didn't want them to have a teleport or dash, right? Like a rogue. If Necromancers are dashing around everywhere, that's a weird fantasy, right? But not giving them enough movement speed options at all, I think is something that we're coming back on.
Yeah.
So, but it's a push and pull, right? It's on a
Ok,
spectrum.
vogliamo aumentare la mobilità del necro ed effettivamente farebbero bene a farlo perché al momento è la classe in assoluto con meno mobilità il negromante. Però niente di cioè, tutto molto vago. Vogliono migliorare, promesse vaghe, ci stanno lavorando. Arriverà.
Is maybe a little bit higher than we expected.
Yes.
So this is one of those situations where, like, kind of in response to the fact that players are really hoping, like, druid players are looking to go after this fantasy of, like, I am the master of the animal kingdom, and I'm going to have all these and nature, right? I'm going to have all these buddies with me. I think it's kind of like moving our hand a little bit. It's like, oh yeah, actually, there is something really cool here. There is fantasy here for us to really latch onto and more that we can do. But at this point, it's still very important we make sure that the necromancer feels distinct and the druid feels distinct after these.
Vogliono che necromante e druido siano diverse e si percepiscano come classi diverse.
We actually kind of hit on last week
sure.
when we were talking on the campfire chat that would be coming in 1.1.1.
Quindi non avranno le stesse
I know
abilità.
we wanted to talk a little bit more about those here. I know we have some changes coming for like monster density, for instance.
Ok, adesso parlano di densità dei mostri. Aumenteranno la densità dei mostri con la patch 1.1.1. Soprattutto nei Nightmare Dungeons e negli Helltide, quindi nelle mare infernali e nei dungeon da incubo. Ah, ecco, c'è un'immagine. Questo è come adesso, con 3 boss e diversi mob. Ok, ci saranno molti più mob nei Nightmare Dungeon. Non lo so, questa è una cosa, non so se è una cosa positiva. Secondo voi è positivo questo?
After you've achieved your build, being able to go in and mow down large numbers of enemies.
Hanno un po' esagerato, mi sa. Cioè, Madonna, adesso è tappezzata di mob sto dungeon.
We're delivering, especially in the endgame content. So that's how to look for Nightmare Dungeons. On Helltide, we've been doing the same thing, increasing density. As I said last week, there are some areas of Helltide that are highly
Aumentato anche le maree infernali, stessa cosa.
Players across all of the different platforms that we support can enjoy this increased density, so it's not just the people with the absolute top-end equipment. So we've also been making sure that as we bump up these densities, that we're doing it in a way that performance stays reasonable. So you can actually, like if we
Speriamo
bump up density
sia
and then it turns
speriamo
the
sia
game
modifica
into a
positiva, dai.
slideshow, we didn't actually make the game more fun. Even though there are a lot of monsters, so it needs to stay performant at the same
Beh,
time. So we've been
questa è
working on
anche una
that at the same
cosa,
time.
buffare la densità dei mob. È anche una cosa che serve per ribuffare l'exp. Dato che con la loro precedente patch hanno nerfato la quantità di exp che dava ogni mob, adesso loro aumentano la quantità di mob, in questo modo aumenta anche l'exp che otterrete giocando, capito?
We're going to be looking at the density there and seeing how close it comes to this this mission statement, this goal.
Ah, arriva anche su
right? And if
Xbox
it's
Final
not
Fantasy
hitting this goal,
XIV.
then we're going to keep
Bene.
working toward that goal. So we really want to make sure that it's capturing that fantasy of mowing down.
Beh, hanno aumentato, hanno
it's a
buffato un
it's a
po' le
great goal for
classi
providers
Dark
online,
Hill.
Right, so once we're able to capture more data from players on live, we can see how players with different like PC specs are able to interact in these spaces. It's going to continue to inform us and let us do more and more double down some of these decisions as we go.
And then I know we have some changes coming in regards to bosses and so forth as well.
That's right. So we did talk about this last week, but we have gotten a lot of feedback before about the about players, particularly like in World Tiers 3 and 4, fighting like dungeon bosses.
Ok, hanno ricevuto un sacco di feedback riguardo ai World Tier 3 e 4.
Their builders really come online, and they've got like a lot of like damage developable targets. You know, like they're mowing through some of these bosses faster than we expect, right? So, or rather, fast enough that's not really challenging and not really engaging. So we are boosting the health of bosses in World Tiers 3 and 4. You know, at brackets as you're kind of going up to the experience. But you know, in exchange for this, in exchange for making some of these pieces just a little bit harder as players are going through them, we are also going to be making a change to the rewards that you get going through these.
Modifica
Now, like,
alle
after
ricompense.
1.1.1 goes live, dungeon bosses starting at level 35 even, so this is before you can get into World Tiers 3 and 4. That is the so once you've done that, or once you've killed those, you're going to have a guaranteed legendary item drop.
Ci sarà almeno un oggetto leggendario garantito all'uccisione di un boss nei Nightmare leggendari, nei dungeon nei dungeon da incubo, cazzo. Nei Nightmare dungeon. Almeno un leggendario garantito all'uccisione del boss.
Butcher has a 100% chance to drop a legendary as well, because he's a boss, of course.
Anche il butcher, ovviamente, anche il macellaio.
Please don't follow me on Twitter unless you really want to see a lot of nerdy stuff. But I did a Twitter poll a while ago where I basically just said you know, what do you think is the chance in which a treasure goblin will drop a legendary item? And I said it was like, you know, 10%, 25%, 40%, 50% with the 4 options. The majority of players voters, I should say, right? All selected 10% was the chance. Everybody had their own, you know, their feelings on it as they were kind of going through it. But the reality is that and I said level 50 treasure goblin.
Il treasure goblin stanno
but the reality
parlando.
is they have a 50% chance to drop legendary items today, and that's like going back to like level 35. And they've got a very very high chance to drop legendary items, but
So what you're saying is sometimes I kill a treasure goblin and it doesn't drop a legendary item.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
that's what I heard.
That's exactly right. So basically, if you flip a quarter every 25 minutes, you know, that's basically your chance to get a legendary item when you're fighting treasure goblins in the overworld. And it's very easy to have like tails 5 times in a row, and then
That's what happens to me every time.
Non ho capito se aumentano il loot, il drop che può lottare il treasure goblin o se lo diminuiscono.
There's nothing wrong with the player's perception of treasure goblins not feeling rewarding. You don't see them that frequently relative to other content types, and when you don't get a legendary item from something called a treasure goblin, that can feel bad. So what we decided to do is we've gone back and said, starting right at level 15 for treasure goblins, 15, they have a guaranteed legendary item.
Ah, da livello 15 sarà garantito un oggetto leggendario all'uccisione del treasure goblin, quindi aumentano il drop rate del treasure goblin.
You need to take it out, you need to get a legendary item from it. That happens very, very early. So we think that's going to be like a really fun update to kind of.
Vabbè, carino, dai, sta cosa.
50% isn't useful in this
Questa
case.
almeno è una patch nella direzione giusta. Ecco, questo possiamo dirlo. È una patch nella direzione giusta.
I will note, Joe missed a wonderful opportunity to drag in Gabi, the goblin.
The treasure goblin.
Into the frame.
Should I try
We have
to
a
pull
plush
this?
treasure goblin just off screen.
We have a very large plush.
Here's this giant treasure
Oh,
goblin
Madonna.
that absolutely doesn't fit on camera
Look how
at all.
happy he is.
È arrivato il treasure goblin.
Now.
Staring at Joe as he's literally talking
We have a
about.
lot of other stuff to discuss.
Staring at Joe as he's literally talking about killing him. So yeah.
They're happy to be of help.
Hanno il pupazzo gigante del treasure goblin.
I know, and so we talked more about, or you actually, when we were on the stream last week, sorry, about 2 weeks in a row, you guys, we talked about respecs and so forth. So I know that is also coming in.
Yeah,
in 1.1.
we just want to confirm that the stuff we
Respec
said last week,
confermano
respec cost by
che con questa
40%,
patch diminuiscono i
players are gonna get
costi
an extra stat
del
pack,
respec.
and and Elixir stat count is going to go up to 99.
Yeah, and the stat shop is just purchasable by
That's
gold.
right.
So
Yeah.
that's just to make sure people
That's
don't think
right.
we're just
Yeah.
selling it.
Tab 1's 100K, Tab 2
Yeah.
200K, Tab 3 is 300K, Tab 4 is going to be 400K.
Yeah.
So you can buy that for your seasonal stash and for your eternal stash.
Yes.
Ok,
exactly.
e ci sarà una
And
stash
then,
aggiuntiva,
one
un
other
forziere
thing that,
aggiuntivo
we
in
did wanna talk
banca.
about, because this was a question that came up last week in regards to like the leaving dungeon options and like teleporting out of dungeons and so forth. And I know you wanted to talk more about that here today.
I don't know. I think I explained it pretty well last time.
So clear.
So clear.
There's a loop there. I don't know why anyone's confused. This is very clear. No, I'm just kidding. We're going to change it back to 3 seconds.
Yes.
Basically, the reason that we increased this is we have, in Diablo 4, we have a mechanic where when you're casting some kind of spell or power and you get hit by some damage, you don't get interrupted immediately. You have to take about 5% of your health and damage before it gets interrupted. And this makes things like town portaling back to town, leave dungeon, etc. feel a lot better.
Saving a prisoner.
Saving a prisoner, absolutely,
Oh,
yeah.
Every time.
So if you're taking like really incidental damage, it's not going to get interrupted. But we were worried about a case where you're in the middle of a high-intensity combat fight or in the middle of a boss fight, and we felt like it was a little bit too easy to get out of that in terms, and that's actually what it's referring to with the loop, which again, I felt like I nailed it, but I guess you know, and so. You know, there are other ways that we could have solved that, right? We could have said like, oh, well, you get pushed back on your cast, or like, oh, well, it's only increased to 5 seconds if you're in a boss fight or something like that. But ultimately, you know, what players really accurately pointed out is, look, this slows down the core loop of the game in a way that's not fun.
Yeah.
So we're just changing it back to 3 seconds.
Yeah. So it was at 3 seconds, went to 5 seconds, going back to 3 seconds because. You know, obviously, good player feedback, from everyone. So
I've got one more bonus thing to talk about too. So, so we've been getting a lot of feedback, obviously, on the end game experience tiers 3 and 4, and you know, Nightmare Dungeons are a really big part of that. Last week we talked about how we were going to be ensuring that the Nightmare Dungeon difficulty was scaled more appropriately.
Right.
So now, like, you know, the tier 70 difficulty was the old version.
Vabbè,
the
insomma.
old version tier 70 is now the tier 100.
Tutte cose di cui abbiamo già parlato,
More accurately
ragazzi.
reflect the balance we have in Diablo 4 versus
Hanno aumentato anche il tempo necessario per teletrasportarsi fuori da un dungeon da 3 a 5 secondi, perché secondo loro era troppo facile per un giocatore teleportarsi fuori dal dungeon in caso di difficoltà, e quindi hanno aumentato.
Ones you're going to want to basically throw in the trash right away. So you're going to want to salvage these and get Citadel dust immediately upon when some of these things kind of pop up. So a couple of the ones that we're actually going to be, for now, we're removing a few of these as we think about reworking them or deciding what we want to do with them. But we're going to be taking these out in 1.1.1. They're not going to appear anymore. That is, so the first is Resource Drain. It's not going to be showing up in Nightmare Citadels anymore. Cold Enchanted is not going to be showing up in Nightmare Citadels anymore for a bit. And then Backstabber is being removed as well as part of 1.1.1. Now, this is not by any means an exhaustive list of the things we'd want to like adjust on the affix side. You know, there's lots more that we want to do to kind of improve this experience. This is just sort of like while we're in here beginning to look at these things, we know that these are problematic. We have adjustments we want to make anyway. We want to go ahead and pull these out and just make the experience better today for players.
Yep. Cool. Awesome to hear. I know that a lot of players have been giving feedback about specific Nightmare Dungeon affixes and everything. So it's great that we've been able to jump on a few of the ones that we know are problematic with the community and kind of pull them out and reevaluate and see what we can end up doing with those. So we did, obviously we talked about the date for the patch notes beforehand.
I don't know what you mean.
But we do want to specify like that we are going to be releasing patch notes, full patch notes next week. It's actually going to be on August 2nd, next week, on Wednesday.
La patch uscirà mercoledì prossimo.
And then 1.1.1 is going to be coming out on August 12th. which is Tuesday. So players will be, did I get those dates right? Yes.
La patch
I'm
uscirà
doing it by
giovedì, non ho
memory.
capito.
I'm doing it by memory.
no idea.
I've seen so many calendars in the last day.
Tuesday after.
Oh, sorry. It is no. I lied.
think it's
It
not
is
the
August 8th.
Yeah.
See, this is dates.
Everyone's
Just
on your
mind
Sto
your
facendo una
August- sorry,
confusione.
August 2nd is when the patch notes will be coming out
Yeah.
in full, and then August 8th is when the patch will actually hit. Sorry, I apologize.
Non ci posso credere, ragazzi, hanno sbagliato la data dello Cazzo, è il vostro lavoro! È il vostro lavoro e sbagliate la data in cui esce la patch! Licenziatelo, Madonna santa! Che rincoglioniti! Ho messo in pausa un attimo perché mi devo calmare. Cioè, cazzo, you had one job! Una cosa dovevi fare, una cosa! Dire la data della patch. È riuscito a sbagliare la data della patch. Allora, risentiamo.
It is on so many
Un idiota, un deficiente. Comunque, risentiamo.
Tuesday after.
Oh, sorry. It is no. I lied.
think it's
It
not
is
the
August 8th.
Yeah.
See, this is dates. Just
Everything's
blind your
blurred
mind.
right now.
August 8th.
Sorry, August 2nd is when the patch notes will be coming out
Allora, le patch notes usciranno il 2 agosto, quindi mercoledì prossimo.
in full, and then August 8th is when the patch will.
L'8 agosto uscirà la patch. Dio santo, che idiota. Quindi l'8 agosto, minchia raga, è tra tanto però, l'8 agosto sono tra 2 settimane. È tanto, eh. Nel frattempo, grazie mille a Alex Pucci che è diventato massivo. Benvenuto su MMO.it, vero massivo. Vabbè, comunque, stendiamo un velo pietoso.
I've had a lot of dates in my head over the past couple of weeks.
Sorry,
so,
we buffed the date.
Yeah, buff the
Buff
date.
the dates.
That's
Just
also
like
part of the
Twitter.
patch notes. So players will be able to see everything next Wednesday. We'll be posting those, so make sure to stay tuned. Of course, on the Diablo social media, etc. We'll end up updating the patch notes there, so players can see it. Just remember, the patch is not that day. We're just posting the notes early so that players can actually see them. This goes back to exactly how we were talking about that we want to better communicate these notes here, similar to how we're doing this here on this campfire chat. And then, of course, August 8th is when the patch will end up going live for all players so that they can
Dio
experience it
santo.
and jump through with all the changes that
Ma come fai a
we're
sbagliare la
detailing
data
here,
della
and they'll be
patch?
seeing in the final patch notes on Wednesday next week. We do want to jump into Q&A because we just
È
went
il
through
tuo
a whole bunch of
lavoro.
stuff right here. I know one question that, as we start to populate questions, feel free to ask them in chat on Twitch, by the way, because we have chat enabled there. But I know one question, and something that we talked about last week, as we're waiting for questions to kind of come in, was about XP in later game, or for late game players and stuff like that. Do we have any update and in regards to that specific topic?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So we did talk about this last week, and
Nel frattempo hanno annunciato la nuova patch di Final Fantasy XIV, ragazzi, intitolata Dawn Trail. Dawn Trail e uscirà nell'estate del 2024. Domani ne parleremo, troverete la news su MMO.it. Sì, sono calmo, sei in ritardo Apollo Gamer, mi sono già calmato da 5 minuti. Però ciò non toglie che sono degli incompetenti cioè sono dei dilettanti allo sbaraglio. Dio santo, una cosa doveva dire il community manager: quando esce la patch, è riuscito a sbagliare la data della patch. Boh, vabbè. Io cosa dovevi dire? Cosa dovevi dire io che sono un giornalista e che ogni giorno mi trovo a dovermi segnare tipo 20 date per questo gioco, quel gioco, quella beta, quell'altra closed beta, l'alfa, l'open beta, eccetera. Lui non riesce ad azzeccare una data. Una data. Vabbè.
what we said then was that
Modifiche per
we're not
late
looking
game?
to make the game feel slower across the board. We're not looking to like slow down the players' like XP gain rate.
Ok, non vogliono rallentare l'esperienza
You know,
all'endgame.
the goal is we
Giurano.
want to make sure the players are having a good time progressing through World Tiers 3 and 4, not feeling like they're hitting a point where it's really, really difficult to make progress. So in response to some of these thoughts, we had gone through and we had raised the amount of experience that you gain from like before the 1.1 patch. When we raised the amount of experience gain you get from Nightmare Dungeon completion, from Helltide Cash.
Abbiamo capito che aumentano Nightmare Dungeon, Helltide.
Did a good buff.
Certo, ragazzi, che
Activities make them feel,
ripetono sempre le
easier
stesse
as part of that.
cose.
And now we're going through and we're updating density inside the Nightmare Dungeons.
Se lo sappiamo che aumentate la densità nei dungeon, l'avete già detto prima.
we are committed to increasing the speed at which the players be progressing.
Ripetono le stesse cose come se fossimo degli idioti.
Players are getting through some of this content. And the kinds of behavior incentivizing as a result of that, right? We want to make sure that players feel that they can play the way that they want and they can progress at a decent pace. But now that we've made a number of these changes, we do want to see what the impact's going to be on the overall XP gain rate across the board for players, and just seeing how different kinds of players are progressing. So that when we go through and we make changes, which we will be making soon, I think probably likely for season 2, when we go through and we make these changes, that's going to be informed by what we see players going through and what their experience is like now.
Yeah,
So it's really just a question of like how much are we going to make adjustments, like what's going to feel right, and that's going to be based on like what we see from players.
We have 2 people actually asking pretty similar questions, but one was specifically calling out Adam Jackson and his thoughts on this, but but they both are very similar questions. One is from Febzilla, the other one's from Karnaga.
I'm so sorry. Can I just jump in really quick? Can I ask chat a question? Do you, yes or no, do you want Adam to read the names of people that he's getting the questions from the chat?
I think we
That
should.
Adam.
Yes.
Okay, he's saying he should. Okay.
I think we should, just because I don't want to go into that whole situation like
Oh,
where
fine.
that other outlet
Okay,
did
okay.
made up names and we don't do that. So
Sure.
Lui comunque è
but,
lui è un
Karnaga and
disastro, il
Febzilla,
ragazzo a
they
destra,
both
Adam
asked
Fletcher.
about,
Lui è un disastro.
like, no.
I knew it. I knew it.
We're all like, no.
I knew it. I knew it.
Infatti lo stanno pigliando per il culo.
I know. Please finish your
Well, we're
question.
gonna read these.
Lo stanno trollando perché lui è un disastro, il ragazzo a destra.
Obviously, it is a huge and popular topic amongst the community. What are our thoughts about crowd control? What are
Se
we
chiamano me faccio un
doing
lavoro
about that,
migliore.
here in the
Vabbè.
I bet we all have thoughts on that, actually.
We do, yeah.
Yes.
Let me
You
just
can
say
jump on that,
first
yeah.
that we
Aspettate ragazzi, ammetto che mi sono perso la domanda.
amongst the community. What are our thoughts about crowd control? What are we planning on doing about that here in the future?
I bet we all have thoughts on that, actually.
we do, yeah.
Yes.
Let me
You
just
can
say
jump on that,
first
yeah.
that we think that as you get into situations where there are lots of monsters on screen and high-end areas where the amount of damage that you're seeing going in and out is really high, so you're having to react really quickly. Situations where you're being hard CC'd, or like stunned or freeze or something like that, can be much more impactful than they are when the intensity and the pace of combat is lower.
Vabbè ragazzi, vi interessa ancora questa fase di Q&A, domande e
Make
risposte?
that experience more fun.
Oppure possiamo passare al gioco vero e proprio?
We want to do that. It's not in 1.1.1, but those are changes that we're looking at right now.
Yeah.
Ok, voglio fare modifiche al CC, al crowd control. Sì, ne abbiamo già parlato, Silma. Ma io sono contento che la Juve sia fuori dalla Conference League. Meno male, coppetta inutile.
There
Meglio
is
così.
a question here regarding, it's my favorite question because I always get this, it's from Cookie Drops. So are you guys planning on addressing the issues related to like the imperfectly balanced on Necromancer, the decrep aura on Necromancer, and those are addressed in 1.1.1.
Yeah, we fixed it.
Those are, we just didn't list all the bug fixes and stuff
There's
like
a
that.
whole lot of bug fixes.
Yeah, so you guys will see those with the final notes and everything. but
Domanda
those
sul
are
necro
addressed
e dicono che hanno
in,
corretto
in
un
this
sacco di
specific
bug,
update, and it's something
quindi
that I
un
know a
sacco
lot
di
of people
bug
have been asking,
fix.
going like, well, I can only add 1 point, yet it says I can add 3 and so forth. So
Yep.
most definitely being addressed in that. We've actually just been getting a general decent amount of questions related to resistances and what the intent is going to be with resistances here in the future. There's a ton of questions, so lots of names. But
Sure, yeah.
I guess like what's the vision
Sure.
on resistances here
Yeah,
in the future?
I talked about it a little bit. The vision is kind of, I think, what the standard vision of most games is, which is everything is impactful and meaningful and feels good, and you invest and get rewarded for those things at all times. But reality is a little bit harder than that, but that is kind of the North Star and what we're trying to do. The idea is that when you invest in elemental resistances, you will notice a difference in the damage that you take. We don't want just armor or damage reduction or any like king stat that is just way better than everything else. That's the only thing that you care about. It is tough to find a perfect balance there of how impactful some things should be versus others, and then can you negate certain kinds of combat when you max things out or only focus on only one thing. And there's a lot of gray area there that we're talking about. But our
Vabbè, intanto
goal is
inizio ad
that
aprire il
we go and
gioco.
really take a deep dive at it is one, we don't want you to just stack armor and that's better than everything else. We don't want you to stack just like general damage resistance and that's just better than everything else. We want elemental resistances to be meaningful, but we also don't want to get to a place where, you fight a fire boss and you stack all fire resistances and it actually can't hurt you. Right? There's always a push and pull in this one.
The inverse of that is actually also really dangerous, which is that you're wandering through the game. You don't always know the kinds of creatures or affix. Obviously, you don't know the kinds of affixes you can be dealing with. You've got 0% poison resistance, and you get basically one tick from a level 60 poison creature kills you.
Sure.
Right. It's like there's a balancing act. The team is, as we move forward, everything that Adam just said is 100% accurate. We want to make sure that the choices between like armor for mitigation, for damage resistance based on passives, legendary powers, glyphs, and paragon nodes, those things are impactful, and that resistance plays a really, really important role. The big difference here is that resistance is a thing that you are going to stack and earn separately, and that they are usually tied to affixes or inherent affixes on rings and jewelry. So it means that some players will be able to go and encounter situations where they are not going to have a predictable amount of resistance when they go into an encounter, which means that we just need to think about what that is going to feel like for that player, and imagine a world where they are able to still complete the content, but it's much more effective to have the appropriate amount of resistance. We need to make that feel impactful. Yes. So there's going to be situations where we are going to ensure that if you are getting into a predictable fight against a creature that you know is dealing a certain kind of damage, and you don't have resistance in mind when you go into that fight, you're going to be penalized for that. That's going to be a really, really difficult situation for you. But we are, trying to balance against the general flow of...
Raga, sinceramente mi sono distratto, non ho sentito cosa hanno detto, però... Hanno detto che vogliono bilanciare il flusso generale, insomma tutte cose che sapevamo già.
Right. And to sort of get to I think the point of the question, the question there, which I think is, do you guys realize that resistances don't feel like they're hitting that goal right now?
Le resistenze non funzionano.
Yes, we're gonna make
Ma va?
All right, sounds good. There is a lot of questions about mounts. And how, we've gotten a lot of feedback about mounts. We've seen Carbot videos, our friend Carbot animation.
Un sacco di domande sulle mount, sulle cavalcature. Hanno visto il video di Carbot animation.
About mounts, very funny if you haven't seen it. Highly made an episode about mounts, very funny if you haven't seen it.
Il canale Carbot Animations è geniale.
Are there any discussions? Are you guys aware? Like, what are you guys planning on doing in relation to mounts?
Yeah, there are a few changes here. So we want to make mounts feel better, sort of broadly speaking.
Vogliono migliorare le mount, come era ovvio. Ci stanno lavorando.
The boost feels really good, especially
Solite cose.
Where it's making sure that the boost feels really good, especially with controller, where it's underperforming, and the boost actually, the boost mechanic on the mounts, it actually stacks. There's a bug right now with that on controller where it's not stacking properly. Fix that.
C'è un bug sulle mount se giocate da joypad.
There's a few other. A key part of this is that the mount gets stuck on things, and that's part.
Sì, la mount.
One of the things that, barricade, for example.
La mount rimane continuamente stucata.
In theory, the idea that you're riding through an area and some bandits or some skeletons have set up a barricade for you, and you have to sort of like dismount and fight all those skeletons. Like that sounds like a fun idea. It doesn't exactly play out that way. You're just sort of annoyed, and you're like, well, can I like kind of ride around the top of the barricade? And then it's a fight about whether the collision actually touches. Anyway, we're gonna fix that. So there are some good changes.
Lo fixeranno, anche qui. Ci stanno lavorando, arriveranno, non si sa quando.
I've seen this a lot as well in chat, and this is something I can answer. Is I'm seeing a lot of people talk about VRAM, like on PC and so forth.
Attenzione, questo mi interessa. Hanno visto che un sacco di giocatori si lamentano dell'uso eccessivo della VRAM su computer. Se migliorano l'ottimizzazione, questo è tanta roba. Certo, potevamo farlo prima.
How that obviously grows over time with certain players, not all players, but certain players with certain spec machines. And they eventually either have to force close or the game actually just ends up closing itself, and then they have to come back into the game. I know with patch 1.10, there was a update related to a memory leak that we ended up addressing. But then in 1.1.1, and I know that QA and so forth, our QA team has been working really closely with our graphics engineering team and testing out a fix that's going to be coming in there that should be helping out a lot of those players and making sure that VRAM stays stable throughout their gameplay and so forth. So that will also be in 1.1.1. It's a popular question. I know a lot of people have been hitting me up on that one specifically.
Ok, avete sentito? Questo è interessante. Hanno promesso che con la patch 1.1.1 hanno diminuito l'uso della VRAM, quindi i giocatori dovrebbero riscontrare meno problemi, soprattutto quei giocatori che riscontravano problemi di crash a causa dovuti al fatto che il gioco usava sempre più VRAM finché non creava un collo di bottiglia e crashava. Dovrebbero aver dicono di aver fissato questo problema e quindi di aver migliorato l'ottimizzazione del gioco. Questa sarebbe una cosa molto positiva perché sappiamo che Diablo 4 non è ottimizzato particolarmente bene e anche a me spesso il gioco crashava. Quindi più di una volta mi è successo che crashava la live, o meglio. Adesso non dovrebbe più succedere, o comunque dovrebbe succedere molto meno. E questo è bene.
There was a question
Anche se avrebbe dovuto essere così già al day one e non dopo 2 mesi al lancio. Però, vabbè.
earlier about overpower and the intent behind it, what like feature plans and so forth.
Sure.
Kind of similar to the
Yeah.
resistance questions. I think there's a lot of questions related to a lot of these things that we do plan on actually
Well,
addressing.
totally. They're fundamentally like how the game works, so I
Yeah.
understand. So the intent of overpower way back in the day was we really wanted to create a stat that was different than crit and felt meaningfully different that players could chase that had kind of a unique mechanic attached to it. Where overpower sits now is that I really like the idea of it. I think is really cool, which is it rewards you for building a really tanky character and you get a big hit of damage. That's really, really awesome. It also scales off of your max health and then the current health percent that you have at the time, and then also scales with Fortify. So normally these stats aren't things that you want to scale to kill things, right? So we were trying to add another avenue, a vector to do that. And then the other thing that's unique about overpower and how we didn't want to just turn into critical strike chance and damage like a lot of mechanics can be, is that you have a baseline low percent to do it, right? It's 3% across everything. And you can never increase that baseline percent ever. And that is a design choice and a goal. And then the idea is that you can, however, get guaranteed overpowers by doing certain mechanics. So the Druid has some, the Necromancer has some where it's like, hey, you do this thing, and the next one is guaranteed. So you can still play around it, but unlike crit, where you're chasing the random chance to get higher and higher and higher to get those procs, overpower just naturally happens kind of rarely, and then the builds that can use it get it guaranteed.
Ok, stanno
And then
parlando del
have
danno
different
da
vectors
overpower.
down to
Il
scale.
danno
The
da
problem right now with
sopraffazione in
overpower really
italiano.
is not necessarily an overpower problem, but it's really the crit vulnerable problem of these other things that scale multiplicatively just overshadow overpower in the same way that even dot damage is very much a lot of times overshadowed too. And so when we're looking at our revamp, the dream and the goal and the utopia we're moving towards is all of these vectors, and not even just overpower, but there's some other ones that I know I'm thinking of that I can't, like those legendary affixes that spawn stuff is another example.
Oh, sure, yes, yeah.
Like we want, when we give you a fantasy as a player, whether it's baseline or via legendaries and uniques, that you're able to build that into the late game and it's delivered on, and you can actually scale and be just as good as anybody else. That's the goal. That will always be the goal that we move towards. We're not there yet, obviously, but that's kind of the intent. Is overpower is another stat that you can actually chase meaningfully via lots of other stats too that it combines with to make a build, and that's kind of the point.
Awesome. And then this is a question that I know everyone talks about. I don't know if this group up here can fully answer it, but it's something that we can follow up on, which is the zooming in and zooming out on your character, getting a wider look of gameplay and so forth. I know there's like performance implications to that because it increases the draw distance and so forth, and we have a ton of different platforms, so it has to be evaluated in any type of way if we were to make that type of change. Because even when it does zoom out on bosses and so forth, there's like some resolution or scaling and so forth that kind of occurs there. Please don't kill me, engineers, if I'm saying that wrong. But maybe that's another topic we can bring up during like another campfire chat with engineers, possibly to maybe clarify
Ok, qui parla del fatto che molti giocatori hanno richiesto la possibilità di zoomare di zoomare meno, cioè di avere un PG meno zoomato. Avete presente che la visuale è abbastanza ravvicinata e molti giocatori hanno detto che vorrebbero avere quella visuale che si vede, che c'è durante i boss, durante i world boss c'è una visuale più alta. Quella stessa visuale vorrebbero averla anche di default sul personaggio. Però, appunto, il community manager Adam Fletcher ha detto che questo implica tutta una serie ovviamente di problemi di ottimizzazione, perché di prestazioni, perché ovviamente avere una visuale meno zoomata e quindi più alta sul terreno implica che si vedono più oggetti a schermo, si vedono più cose e quindi il gioco diventa più pesante, c'è un problema di performance. Ci stanno lavorando, anche lì stanno cercando di capire se possono effettivamente migliorare oppure no, se possono effettivamente alzare la visuale della telecamera, però anche qui molto vaghi, molto generici, ci stiamo lavorando, è una cosa di cui parleremo in futuro. Per adesso nessuna novità, nessuna data. Uè, buonasera Edopic, benvenuto. Non ti preoccupare, adesso ti facciamo il riassunto.
A little
Siamo,
bit on that
siamo
after,
giusto alla
so,
fine
or we
della
can follow
live
up
degli
separately
sviluppatori.
after the campfire chat, but I know that's
E buonasera anche a
a question
Sciamano,
that a lot of
buonasera
people have been
ragazzi.
asking.
Siamo agli
And then
sgoccioli.
there's questions regarding are there any additional options for customization down the road that you guys are looking at, like pets or wings,
Buonasera anche
etc.?
Lione Kenobi.
You
Stiamo
know, it's something that we're looking
seguendo la
at
live degli
evaluating,
sviluppatori
depending
Blizzard
on
dedicata alla
etc.
patch 1.1.1 di
It's
Diablo
something that we're
4
looking at and evaluating.
che uscirà l'8 agosto. Hanno detto che le patch notes ufficiali usciranno mercoledì prossimo, quindi mercoledì 2 agosto usciranno le patch notes. La patch vera e propria andrà live sui server l'8 agosto, quindi martedì 8 agosto.
Just depending on like player feedback. Right now, we're very focused on, obviously creating additional more content for players to play through at the moment, more so than some of the.
E verranno ribuffate tutte le classi, in particolare Barbaro e
Yeah, we
Incantatrice.
want to add more stuff like that. That stuff is really fun to add. But we felt that right now what was really important is helping sorcerers, helping barbarians, and some of these other buffs to classes.
Avete sentito?
And I
Vogliono
think
aiutare in
there's,
particolare
we'll do this one
Barbaro
last
e
question,
Incantatrice.
here before we end the stream, but one thing that people have been asking about is like all the changes that they're seeing today. Is this like encapsulating everything that we're doing? We had a question in here regarding like, for instance, someone enjoyed playing a frozen orb sorcerer in like Diablo 2, for instance, and wanting to have that same type of fantasy in Diablo 4. Do you guys plan on doing additional adjustments in the future regarding other builds or other, like creating variability across that?
Sure, no, absolutely. This patch, I talked a little bit about like we have our short-term goals and long-term things we're thinking about. Forevermore long-term, really, infinitely long-term, is the idea that, every fantasy that we sell you, and I can talk a lot about, I talk to the team about this all the time. Like,
And by sell, we
but, all right, yeah, sell is probably the bad word, but I think that we've like...
We're
when we-
advertising it. Like if you see it on legendary
Every
aspects,
fantasy-
if you see-
That's really what I
if you
mean
see it on
is-
passives, you see it on
Yes.
skill tags, like
Avete notato? Qui è successo un dettaglio molto, molto curioso. Lui ha detto: ogni fantasia, ogni tipo di classe che vi vendiamo. E poi si è ritratto. Ha detto: no, scusate, non volevo dire vendiamo una brutta parola. Perché ovviamente a livello di marketing è meglio non usare quella parola vendere. Però è esattamente quello che fa Blizzard. Blizzard vende.
Every fantasy that we sell you...
Guarda, si
I talk
corregge.
a lot about, I talk to the team about this all the time.
And by sell, we
But, all right, yeah, sell is probably the bad word, but I think that we've like...
we're
when we-
advertising it. Like if you see it on legendary
Every
aspects,
fan-
Vendere una brutta parola, dice. Ho capito, però è quello che fate, ragazzi miei. Cioè, non stiamo a girarci intorno, non prendiamoci in giro. Non è che state qui a fare beneficenza. Fate esattamente quello. Quindi, insomma, non prendiamoci in giro i giocatori.
Really what I
if you
mean
see it on
is-
passives, you see it on
Yes.
skill tags, like we're saying like, hey, look, this is a cool thing for you
When
to go
we
after.
show you something that is cool and awesome, we deliver on it, right? Like when you log into Necromancer, you see right away, just when you see your basic skills, like, hey, there's a bone thing, a shadow thing, and a blood thing, right? And then there's army stuff. All of those things should be delivered on and be awesome. And then as you go through the game,
Comunque,
you
come
legendary
ovvio, dicono che vogliono
techniques,
rendere
one,
tutte le
double
classi
down and make
viabili.
those things really cool, and two, unlock
Tutte le
more
build
things that are
viabili,
awesome.
meglio.
And what our goal always is that all of these things are awesome and cool. When we find something that isn't hitting the mark, we
Certo.
either buff it or redesign it in such a way that it's hitting the mark and it's attractive and ideally really fun and exciting for players to chase. Like that's always what we're going to be trying to do.
È chiaro, vogliono
So,
rendere
yeah,
tutte
this
le
isn't
build
exhaustive
viabili,
forever. We are always gonna be
senza
adapting
dover
and
per
updating
forza
things.
costringere i
If
giocatori
something
a
just
seguire
really
il
isn't
meta.
working, even if it's like something that I made, I have
Non
adapted.
vogliono costringere i giocatori a dover seguire per forza il meta, è chiaro, bisogna vedere se poi ce la faranno.
And updating things, and if something just really isn't working, even if it's like something that I made, I have no hubris about like, hey, that thing, it was awful. Make it something good, right? Like at the end of the day, the players are the ultimate judge, jury, and executioner for us. Of
Exactly.
like, did it work? Is it good? Is it fun? Yes or no? If not, then we have to be malleable enough to change that.
Right, and we could be looking at data too. We could be seeing like how many players are picking what kinds of passes, what kind
Absolutely,
of
we
aspects
do
are they
all the time,
wearing,
yeah.
what kind of uniques are they using, like, and we can see, you know, so like we know when like if no one's equipping a particular aspect, like we can see that, but like okay, well that's clearly something we're gonna need to want to rework or update or
Yep.
buff or do something with, right? Like this, to Adam's point, it is a never-ending process. You know, we keep talking about how, you know, we're all here trying to make Diablo 4 the very best game that it can be, and the reality
Sì,
is
parlano
this is
parole,
iteration,
parole,
this is
parole.
conversation.
Ov dice, vogliamo
Also
rendere
looking
Diablo
at
4 il gioco migliore possibile. Ovvio, non ho mai sentito nessuno sviluppatore dire il contrario. Grazie al cavolo.
Thanks to Adam for kind of walking us through everything.
Oh, se Dio vuole ci siamo.
We do have final patch notes
Abbiamo
coming next
finito.
Wednesday, that is August 2nd.
Mamma mia,
So
quante
we'll have
parole.
revealed full where people can read through them.
Quindi il 2 agosto usciranno le patch notes definitive della
And,
1.1.1.
provide full feedback and so forth. And then of course, that's my tick. Someone called out my tick earlier. And so forth. Stop it, Adam. That's my tick. I will stop that one day. I probably won't. But we actually do have our patch for 1.1.1. The date will be on August 8th as well. So
8 agosto.
players can expect patch
La
notes
patch.
next Wednesday. And then, of course, 1.1.1 hitting on August 8th, which is Tuesday. So looking forward to seeing everyone's feedback, everyone jumping in, and checking out, of course, the new changes coming to pretty much every class now and in regards to balance changes and so forth. I did it again.
And so forth.
Now you're in your own head.
Now I'm in my
È riuscito a sbagliare di nuovo, sentiamo.
every class now and in regards to balance changes and so forth. I did it again.
And
Lui comunque è un disastro. Il community manager lo farei meglio io di lui, ragazzi.
Now you're in your own head.
È riuscito a sbagliare di nuovo. No, io non mi arrabbio neanche più, perché è lui che dovrebbe arrabbiarsi con se stesso. Cioè, cioè dice tutto da solo, non c'è bisogno che io dica nulla.
Now I'm just stuck in this like my own empty room saying it over and over. But
and
anyways,
get us feedback on how this went, like, and how you like this format for talking about patch notes.
exactly, yeah. We want to see if this worked out really well with the community. So yeah, please.
Ma sapete perché lui si incespica così tanto? Cioè, dico lui, ma è esattamente sotto di me. Lui, Adam Fletcher, incespica così tanto perché parla troppo. Cioè, ripete più volte le stesse cose, anche quando non ce ne sarebbe bisogno. Allora, se ripeti le stesse cose per 3 volte, è normale che su 3 volte, una volta ti sbagli. Cioè, lui aveva già detto, la patch uscirà l'8 agosto. L'aveva già detto, non c'era bisogno di ripeterlo. Invece l'ho ripetuto e così facendo si è sbagliato perché ha detto e quindi le patch notes usciranno l'8 agosto. No, scusate, mi sono sbagliato. Cioè, parla troppo. Se avesse detto meno non si sarebbe sbagliato. Ecco, vabbè. Questo, scusate, è solo una parentesi mia perché io, come sapete, ho studiato comunicazione, quindi vedere queste cose mi triggera, mi dà fastidio perché io mi occupo di comunicazione e lui, appunto, Adam Fletcher, qui in basso, è un disastro totale e assoluto in termini di comunicazione e quindi deformazione professionale mia.
Provide feedback, us going through the notes, and then of course releasing the notes afterwards. It's a huge help for us and how to communicate with you guys out in the community. So thank you guys again. We hope you enjoyed this
Bene.
Campfire Chat ++, New Game ++.
Sure.
And we will see you on our next stream, which we haven't announced on. We're thinking about doing some campfire chats with like maybe other teams here, whether it's our art animation teams, audio teams, and so forth, just so you guys can see kind of a deeper look into some of the development within our seasons and Diablo 4 from other people. So we do plan on expanding these a little bit more, and of course, having campfire chats.
Mamma mia, quanto parli, zio. Quanto parli. Non c'è niente da dire, ma continuo a parlare. Ho sbagliato di nuovo?
Gameplay and design and so forth.
You did it again.
Thanks.
No, vabbè, ma non ci... Raga, a lui finita questa live gli fanno un culo così. Gli fanno un culo così a lui, a Dan Fletcher, finita questa live.
Streams to talk more about the gameplay and design and so forth.
You did it again.
Thanks. I hope
Che disagio, ragazzi, comunque, è veramente cringe.
you guys have a
sto
great
momento.
weekend. Thank you again from the Diablo 4 team here at Blizzard, and yeah, have a great Friday.
Thanks, everybody.
Ciao, ciao, ciao. Mamma mia, ragazzi, non so se lo rivedremo nella prossima live, Adam Fletch. Community manager disastroso. Va bene, ed eccoci qui, quindi. Vediamo un po' come è stata accolta. Un botto di dislike, vabbè, sappiamo che in questo momento va di moda. Pensiero personale, le spell del gioco sono poco interessanti. Per quante build puoi fare, le animazioni sono quelle. Io lo trovo poco flash. Dici Edopic, guarda, il buon Askez sarebbe d'accordo con te, perché Askez ha sempre criticato le spell di questo gioco, addirittura prima che uscisse, e ha sempre detto che erano poco interessanti rispetto ad altri action RPG isometrici, come ad esempio Titan Quest. Buon weekend, buonasera dai Graf. Stasera sono contento e nemmeno Adam Fletcher può buttarmi giù, viva il cringe. Beh, il weekend è sempre una buona cosa. Buon weekend a tutti, ragazzi, assolutamente. Però non credo che Adam Fletcher passerà un buon weekend, questo ve lo posso dire. Allora, io devo dire che in generale mi è sembrato una buona live. Adesso lasciamo perdere appunto il community manager che si è continuamente impappinato, eccetera, eccetera. Devo dire, le informazioni... Di fatto questa patch a cosa serve? La patch 1.1.1 serve per correggere il tiro dopo la patch 1.0, che è stata disastrosa. È stato questo nerf, è stata accolta in maniera terribile dalla community, eccetera, eccetera. E quindi, tutto sommato, devo dire, questa live sicuramente più positiva delle altre. Certo, l'8 agosto è più in là di quanto pensassi io. Io ero abbastanza sicuro che avremmo visto la patch già la prossima settimana, invece è quella dopo. Quindi esce tra quasi 2 settimane. Che è tanto. Che è tanto. Cioè, in pratica gli stanno dicendo che per 10 giorni, quasi 2 settimane, dobbiamo tenerci le classi nerfate a merda, con i problemi. Cioè, boh, ecco. Comunque, alcuni l'hanno presa meno bene di altri, nella community. Sì, il gioco è in early access, cosa che noi abbiamo sempre detto. Io dico da marzo, ragazzi, che questo gioco sarebbe uscito in beta. Da marzo. Vabbè, comunque. Ragazzi, questo è. Ti ricordi quella sensazione delle prime ore di Lost Ark? Non provo quel wow, che figata. Sì, Edopic. Ma infatti, io ho sempre detto che Lost Ark, secondo me, si meritava di più come MMORPG. Cioè, Lost Ark, il grande problema di Lost Ark, ragazzi, è l'endgame. Nel senso che Lost Ark ha questo endgame assurdo, coreano, molto pesante. Perché i coreani sono matti, vogliono quel tipo di endgame super grindoso, super hardcore, in cui devi giocare 12 ore al giorno. E quindi il problema è l'endgame, che non è adatto a noi occidentali, a noi europei, chiaramente. Però il gioco di per sé, valutato, se lo valutiamo come MMORPG, io ho sempre difeso e difenderò sempre lo Stark, perché era un buon action MMORPG. E io questo l'ho sempre detto, anche se poi Askzo ogni volta gli tira merda, dice no, fa schifo, è una merda, ma non è vero. Cioè, strutturato come MMORPG, era strutturato bene lo stack, però sì, sicuramente aveva un problema di endgame. Però ad esempio non mi ricordo il nome della classe, con la doppia A ma gameplay clamoroso. Non so quale intendi con la doppia A ma c'era... io usavo la tierist, l'artigliere. Con la doppia arma è a tipo Rogue, no? Adesso non mi ricordo il nome, se vuoi comunque lo trovi sul sito ufficiale. Io faccio una provocazione, ma alla fine forse non è a meglio Diablo 2 Resurrected. Che ne pensate? Diablo 2 Resurrected è diverso, Zedo. Non lo ritengo per forza superiore a Diablo 4 perché comunque è un gioco dei suoi tempi, Diablo 2, e lo dico con tutto l'amore che voglio a Diablo 2, però è un gioco del 2000 che non ha endgame praticamente, nel senso che l'endgame di Diablo 2 è fare e rifare la campagna ogni volta a una difficoltà superiore, normale, incubo, inferno, finché non arrivi a sbloccare gli Uber Boss e Uber Tristram e il Co-Level. È un gioco. Allora, per l'epoca sicuramente è stato un capolavoro assoluto. Cioè, un gioco incredibile. Però, oggigiorno nel 2023, a un nuovo player non consiglierei Diablo 2. Cioè, un nuovo giocatore che si approccia alla saga di Diablo con tutto il bene che voglio, però non gli consiglierei Diablo 2. Il Gunsling, figo, Dopic. Però capisco, mi rendo conto che per un nostalgico che appunto conosce già Diablo 2 appunto da quando è uscito, come nel tuo caso, Zedo, mi rendo conto che Diablo 2 è un po' la comfort zone, no? Cioè Diablo 2 è un po' come tornare a casa. Fa sempre piacere tornare su Diablo 2, anche a me fa sempre piacere. Sicuramente l'itemization è superiore. Cioè l'itemization di Diablo 2 è gestita meglio, molto più chiara, molto più semplice, ma non meno profonda. È il discorso che facevo l'altra volta, cioè Diablo 4 ha questa itemization assurda, inutilmente macchinosa, inutilmente complicata, ma sinceramente preferivo un'itemization più semplice, più chiara, ma gestita meglio come quello di Diablo 2. Quindi in quell'aspetto considero Diablo 2 superiore. Nell'itemization è sicuramente superiore. Sul resto, sinceramente, no. Nel senso, l'endgame di Diablo 4 è molto più vario, è molto più articolato. In generale, come gioco, ha molti più contenuti. Vabbè, graficamente è superiore, però è ovvio perché sono passati 20 anni. Tecnicamente, insomma, ragazzi. Poi io non sono qui per convincere nessuno, però in generale. Cioè, il punto è. Non è che adesso Diablo 4 improvvisamente è diventato un gioco di merda perché è uscita questa patch che ha nerfato tutti. Io lo so che in questo momento va molto di moda parlare male di Diablo 4. Praticamente mezzo internet sta parlando male di Diablo 4. Però, anche lì, a dirla tutta, questa patch che è uscita, appunto la patch, questa patch disastrosa, la 1.1.0, alcune cose erano anche giuste, nel senso che il fatto di nerfare alcune classi, di nerfare alcune specifiche build, era giusta come cosa, perché alcune build erano troppo forti. Solo che hanno esagerato, hanno nerfato tutti to the ground, insomma, li sono fatti prendere la mano e infatti adesso fanno la 1.1.1 per correggere il tiro. Però, però di per sé, a livello concettuale, a livello di idee, ci stava. Questo non lo dico io, lo dice anche Anubis. Sapete, il buon Anubis che è grande esperto di Diablo. Comunque, poi Gianza ne ha parlato male. Sti cazzi, sti cazzi, nel senso... non... Poi Gianza è un uomo, è un essere umano come lo sono io, come lo siamo tutti, ecco. Ehm... Diablo 2 di bello ha che gli oggetti inutili diventano utili con le rune. Sì, 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 è vero, è vero. Ma poi, nel senso, conosco benissimo il parere e l'opinione di Poegianza e lo so che è molto critico e sicuramente il gioco ha dei problemi di bilanciamento, altrimenti gli sviluppatori non sarebbero qui a fare una live ogni settimana per scusarsi. Quindi sicuramente il gioco ha dei problemi di bilanciamento, però non è un brutto gioco. Cioè, è quello il fatto. Per il resto, ragazzi, io vi linko in chat la news che abbiamo pubblicato su MMO.it con tutti i dettagli. Questa è la replica della live. Aspettate che la metto anche in chat di Diablo. Perfetto. E quindi ragazzi, ricapitolando, 8 agosto esce la patch 1.1.1. Scusate, allora, buonasera Rabello, l'8 agosto è un po' tardi, considerando il fatto che tante persone che giocano a Diablo stanno aspettando l'uscita di Baldur's Gate 3, anche se è un genere completamente diverso, per me è sempre un gran bel gioco. Sì, sono d'accordo, ma ragazzi, io comunque non modifico la mia recensione. Io a Diablo 4 gli ho dato 8 più. 8 più su 10, che comunque per gli standard di MMO.it è un bel voto, eh. Noi non siamo come quelle testate che regalano gli 8. Quindi è un bel voto e io lo confermo assolutamente, 8, quell'8 più. Cioè il mio voto non cambia. Ehm, Comunque, Plinious, sì, ai tempi avevi predictato la questione build e bilanciamenti, ma assolutamente, raga, io da quando ho provato la prima beta a marzo, la prima closed beta a marzo, che dico, ragazzi, questo gioco sarà bello, ci divertiremo un sacco, faremo la gilda, insomma, ci divertiremo come dei pazzi, ci nerderemo come dei pazzi, ma uscirà in beta. Uscirà in beta perché non è pronto al lancio, sempre detto. No, per carità è poco interessante il game loop e le spell. Orai dei world boss assurdi. Gioco ad altro, mi dispiace, però mi dispiace. Ci sta, Edopic, gli orai dei world boss sono assurdi, sono assolutamente d'accordo, l'ho sempre detto, e infatti è uno dei motivi per cui non gli ho abbassato il voto. Nel senso che io inizialmente pensavo di dargli tipo un 8,5 e poi alla fine sono sceso a 8 più. Perché quella è una cosa di cui effettivamente bisogna parlare. Però... Ah, poi Gianza c'è da dire che non è riuscito a battere Elias al mondo 3 e poi non l'ho più visto giocare in live, spero che sia arrivato almeno all'endgame. Ma allora, Rami, l'endgame di per sé è quello che si apre al livello 50 non appena hai finito la storia. Quello già è endgame. Poi possiamo discutere sul cosiddetto endgame, cioè sulla fase, sulla parte più avanzata dell'endgame, cioè quella che si sblocca col World Tier 4. E quindi sì. Buonasera Satineco. Allora, io adesso ragazzi faccio un attimo, mi prendo 5 minuti di pausa, vado un attimo in bagno, refillo il bicchiere, solite cose e ormai mi sono abituato, tra l'altro ormai mi sono abituato a dirlo in inglese, refillo il bicchiere, riempio il bicchiere, quindi datemi 5 minuti, dopodiché giochiamo a Diablo 4, cambio anche il titolo della live, buonasera sciamano, anzi cioè non ho capito se sei appena arrivato. Se te ne vai, buona serata, buon weekend. Quindi lo chiamo e cambio anche il titolo della live. Per adesso loggo il mio druido, ragazzi. Non loggo la season, sto loggando l'Eterno, il reame Eterno perché voglio farvi vedere alcune cose. Cambio anche il titolo e ci vediamo tra un attimo. Datemi 5 minuti. No, neanche, 2 minuti, dai. Scusate, metto un po' di aria condizionata e arrivo subito. Ma tra l'altro, ma l'audio? Ah, avevo tolto l'audio del gioco, già, giusto. Ce lo devo rimettere perché sennò qua... Perfetto, magari giusto per non sentire sempre i maledetti violini di Kiovashad andiamo a Ked Bardu, che dite? Così almeno è qualcosa di un po' diverso. Fatemi controllare se la grafica è tutto giusto. Sì, ci teleportiamo a Ked Bardu. Torno, torno subito, ragazzi. Dai, eh. Ecco. Allora. Buoni ragazzi. State buoni. Ma cazzo, ma non si vede... Perché non si vede il gioco? No, mi spiace. Siete stati per un quarto d'ora con una schermata nera. Mi dispiace ragazzi. Che fail. Ma... si è bucato tutto. Allora ragazzi, datemi un attimo che riavvio la live, così poi la metto su YouTube. Però davvero 30 secondi. 30 secondi e... Esatto, l'hanno pecciato con la schermata nera. No, ma adesso fixo subito ragazzi, voglio 30 secondi. Bella e ripartiamo. Dai, fate F5.